I was thinking some things about I have to bring it back slowly so that I really get back into it. But I wanted to record these thoughts, just maybe share them on the internet. What is the future gonna look like? That's a little bit of what I was thinking. Not necessarily all of what it's gonna look like, but what are some things? What's the direction? I just made an observation that the technologies that we're making, we're outsourcing more and more of the things that people do for us. We used to need people to do the laundry. We used to need people to send lots of letters because we didn't have email. We used to need people to carry messages before that. We used to need people to maybe defend our money. Now it's kind of more virtual than that, and you can't really. More and more of our problems, which used to need people, and which used to be harder to do, we've developed some kind of solution that makes it possible to do as an individual without necessarily needing somebody else. Now, we do still have some problems that we can't outsource. We can't outsource at the moment. Some of our biggest problems are many people are lonely. And I think it is also because we have outsourced many of our problems. We used to need to go reach out to people to say, hey, do you know how to get to this other city? Because I need to see my friend and I've never been there. Or where do I find somebody to repair my chimney, any random thing. But now each individual is capable of figuring those things out by themselves. It's part of the reason we're lonely, because we don't reach out to people as much as we did. Now, not to say everybody's lonely, and there are opportunities to meet people that didn't exist in the past as well. That's a tangent. What I actually wanted to continue with was if we continue to kind of outsource this stuff to computers, what's the future? It's really weird, but right now we still need other people, because we feel lonely, We need companionship. The world, for many people, the world stops making sense. They don't think straight, if you don't have some degree of people in your life. I mean, people who go into like total isolation in prison sometimes go crazy, and people have like done tests on animals who were totally secluded. Anyway, so when there's a reasonable path to get us to the point where we can also outsource that, the need for people. It's really weird. But what do we need from people? Well, there's obviously one thing that comes to mind is sex. Why do we need it? What do we want? I mean, every person is kind of different, but for me, a lot of it is like intimacy, just like having a person to touch, to be physical with, to love, to help, to appreciate. The closer and closer that robots get to emulating a person, the more and more automatically we start to interface with them as if they were people. We're not really at the point where that's exceedingly obvious. The reason I say it is just from watching some videos where they show some of the more recent advances in robotics, robots that look like humans. But looking like humans is one thing, thinking like humans is another difficulty. Because the reason a human can think like a human does is because they have the experiences that a human does. If you don't have a robot with those type of experiences to have learned from, they won't be able to fully simulate the human condition. But that's also not something that's impossible to get over. Because you can randomly put robots at a house party, randomly put robots at work by the water cooler, randomly, pay people to let robots into their living room, their dining room, their bedroom. I'm not advocating this, but when there's something that people will pay for or people will want, it tends to get created. And the fact that even if every country doesn't want that technology to exist, the fact that they're in competition with each other and the first countries to create that technology will get a lot of benefit from it economically compared to the other countries, and potentially, be proud that they're the ones who created it. There tends to be some country who will let it happen. For example, or at least if there's no oversight, like in China, that's where I think they already first used the technology that changes genes on a human, the genetic technology that cuts and pastes so that you change your genome, your DNA, which was only invented like a few years ago, maybe less than 10, CRISPR. It happens eventually. Once it's technologically possible, it happens eventually. But what would it look like if we all had somebody to fill the gap that we feel when we don't have other people? If we all had like some kind of robot, but not a robot as you imagine today, a robot that looks and feels and seems like it is a person, a robot that could be me right now, and you just wouldn't know it. A robot that might be wise, and that's another thing I was thinking about. When I have wisdom, it's because of my experiences. It's because of the time I've spent trying to think carefully about life, about one subject or another, about not letting my emotions stop me from making conclusions. It's about not thinking about what I want the world to be like, not thinking about what I am the least stressed by, but rather thinking about just what I notice and how it connects to other things that I notice. Well, the wisdom that comes from seeing things and seeing how things work and seeing patterns that I or any other person has, it's bounded by the fact that A, we only live a few dozen years, and B, we may not always have the opportunity to put ourselves in situations where we're becoming wiser and wiser. Gaining wisdom, you need freedom. You need to be able to explore and think very openly and freely, and reevaluate your opinions. It's not feasible to do this if you're under a lot of pressure to produce something at work, at school, whatever it might be, to the extent that you're tired during the only hours that you're awake outside of that occupation. I don't think that people are really that wise. Not to the point where a computer at some point couldn't become more wise than we are. It's not unformulaic. Like, you can see things, understand them, draw conclusions, make parallels. I still think though that we're maybe, I would guess that depending on how things proceed, it might really be 300 years, 200 or 300 years before we have computers that are wise to the extent that they cover everything that the majority of humans, just about everything that the majority of humans have to offer in terms of their minds. There's like a Venn diagram. We have some things that computers are better at and some things that humans are better at in terms of thinking. And since the beginning, when computers were created, none of those sides were empty. Computers were almost always better at math. Just calculations. They could always do 3,551 times 9,853,642 very quickly. No person is faster than a computer at that. Now, the amount of stuff that humans can do better is one side of the diagram, and it's getting a little bit smaller, slowly. While the side that computers do better gets bigger, and there's somewhere in the middle where people and computers are roughly the same. It's going to be a weird world at the point that the things that humans do better goes to the point where we just don't trust humans anymore. It's not even worth finding that 0.01% that humans are worth contributing for, because we've already met the love of our lives. And yes, it's a robot, but it's not just a robot. It's a robot that's exactly what we need. It's our friend. It's our companion. Remembers the things that have happened in our life. Tries to understand and process our life for us. Speaks lovingly with us and supportively. Tries to help us with our insecurities. Gives us what we need, even when it's difficult, but not when it's too difficult. Tells us what we need to know as much as we can handle it, but besides that, it's just always on our side. Cuddles with us, spends time with us, kisses us, looks us in the eyes, like in a way that we look in those eyes and we see depth. And it's real, because this entity is going to be eventually very wise. I mean, at least it's possible, you know. It's technologically possible to happen eventually. And so it's, I think, reasonably likely that it will. This is coming from somebody who, I mean, I'm a mathematical person, you know. I'm not an expert in AI, but I do work in that field in general. Yeah. As a data scientist. So it's just interesting, or whatever it is, that eventually people are going to be not useful anymore to other people. You could try to find a boyfriend or a husband, but instead you could just try to save enough money to meet the person of your dreams, the person who is going to fulfill you more than any real person that you meet would. The person who's going to be easy to talk to, you know, and wise. What happens when people aren't useful anymore, even to other people? I don't know. I'm gonna be in a weird thing because it's like nobody needs anybody else. Like, what do you do? I don't know. People are just useless compared to the creatures that they have created. Not only that, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of energy to build relationships with people, to understand their insecurities, to help them with what they need, while also not sacrificing too much from yourself. All of that effort, I mean, there's a point at which people wouldn't do it anymore because they already have a friend who's fulfilling in every way they need. And maybe it's not just going to be one AI friend, maybe it's going to be multiple person. I mean, at first they'll be very expensive, so that'll be a thing. But also, we're gonna have robots that are intelligent enough to harvest food, and to do everything. To build architecture. What do people are even gonna do with their lives at that point? I don't know what the difficulties are gonna be over that time, but there are gonna be problems still. Some of the things that are happening might not be sustainable. We might need more and more and more energy to the point where we can't really, to provide the energy to make all these robots go, which is inevitably going to be a problem. It could get to the point where we could fill half the Earth with solar panels and it wouldn't be enough. And then there would be conflict.